Hi, Gerald Dixon here. I had wanted to take a moment and do this on video rather than writing a lengthy reporting of events that happened to me last Tuesday at the council committee meeting. Pretty shocking and telling, of course, but amazing. And so I wanted to recount them for you here on video. Recently, after talking to council about feelings I had on particular legislation, questions, concerns, etc., and their unwillingness to answer me in a public way about public legislation, I've just had it. I'm tired of giving them the respect of going to them and assuming that they will do their job, adhere to their obligations of office, those which are why they are there and what they are being paid to do. So as a result, I'm fed up, and I decided to go ahead and start taking this camera into the committee room where they discuss legislation, if they do, and introduce legislation, talk about it, etc. So last Tuesday was the second committee meeting that I had taken it into, and I can tell that they don't like it. They feel that it's an intrusion. Of course, they didn't feel that way when the people that were leading the issue of recall against Jacqueline Thompson was in there filming her and Leslie LaCourte. They didn't have a problem with it then. Of course, here we are now. Anyway, so I took my usual seat in the back of the room, closest to the council chamber door, and I set up my tripod, and the meeting started. In attendance were the city auditor, the street supervisor, I believe is his title, Jeff Hart. It was city attorney Michael Bivens, and the service director Zach Woodruff. Lori Elmore, councilperson Lori Elmore was slightly late, and councilperson Rodriguez was late by several minutes. Anyway, so I'm sitting there and I'm filming. It's all very boring, very normal. Nothing is out of the ordinary. And I must say that since I've been coming to the meetings, I always maintain a quiet, calm demeanor. I might have reactions to what they're saying, etc., a shrug of the shoulder, a look skyward, etc. But overall, very cordial, very polite, very quiet, very respectful of the proceedings that are going on. That's always been the case in the 9 years since I've been going. I spoke with school board member Joy Bivens for a few minutes. We chatted about this or that, and the meeting began. And I'm even so respectful that when people try to talk during the meeting, I don't like to talk. And that comes from my acting days, being a respectful audience member. As much as I want it when I'm on stage for you to be that way with me, so I should be that way when others are doing something that I'm spectating. Anyway, so the meeting goes on and on and on. And finally at the end, there's nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing's different. Now, I have to preface this by saying that I think the day before or 2 days before, I had written a blog post about conflicts of interest. And in it, I called out Council President Jim Graham. And I did so because there were several conflicts of interest when the Charter Review Commission was formed, and I took issue with them. And I took issue with him for not being more cautious about those conflicts when assembling the Charter Review. And so in this blog post, I called him out. I said that he is responsible for these conflicts, and it's wrong. There's a reason that conflicts are heated. It's called the public trust. But they don't seem to care about the public trust. You know, trust be damned. Full speed ahead. It doesn't matter to them. So he can't seem to understand that. He can't seem to see what the conflicts were, etc., etc. To me, it's just an excuse, you know? And so there's that preface. So at the end of the meeting, I'm folding up my tripod, getting ready to leave, and Jim Graham comes around and he comes up to me while I'm sitting there in the seat, and he starts talking to me. And this is pretty much what was said. He said, hey, I heard you wrote something about me on the internet. And he said, you know I'm not on the internet, so I really think it's unfair of you to write things about me that I can't see. I don't know what he meant by that. I mean, computers are everywhere, and if he's not on a computer or can't see it, I don't know what that problem is. Anyway, he complains then that he gives me plenty of opportunity to speak in council out front at the council chambers. But of course, there he edits, if you've spoken about the same thing more than once, he won't let you talk. He's got a list of rules that you can't say certain things and so forth. So his argument is specious anyway. But as he's saying all this, his voice is rising and his face is getting more red. And at that point, I turn on my camera and start videoing. And that incites him more, and he's looking into the lens and looking over at me. And again, remember, I'm sitting and he's standing above me, looming over me. And he's saying, go ahead, film me, go ahead. I don't care what you do with it. You can show it to anyone you want. Go ahead and film me. And he's getting very out of control, and I can sense this. I pan my camera over to everyone else, and at this point, because he's gotten a little louder, everyone hushes and stops and looks over at Jim Graham and I and starts listening in. And my sense of the room was, because there were no Gerald Dixon, friends of Gerald Dixon in the room, there was a sense I felt among at least some of them there saying without words, get him, Jim, get in a lick for us, tell him, Jim. Sort of a cosmic or way of sort of ganging up on me. That's how it felt. And so Jim's voice keeps rising. He says I'm a coward behind the keyboard. And I have to say something about that is, the fact is yes, I write things on the keyboards and put them out there on the internet to criticize my elected leaders, and then I go in and face them every week in the back meeting and in the front meeting. I face them eye to eye. So there's no writing behind a keyboard and then hiding and never seeing them. They see me every week. That's not a coward. Anyway, so he continues the rising of his voice and everything, and I feel that he understands at some point, because the room got quiet, that he's got an audience. And I felt that that when he was doing so, he was becoming the hero amongst his friends and peers in that council chamber. The mayor, she turned and watched the entire thing. I'm afraid that this camera only records for a certain amount of time, and then I have to return it on to start recording again. So it may seem like there's jump cuts in this video. But what I was saying was that I had panned the room, and there's everyone standing there, quiet, watching this scene play out. It's really amazing. And one thing that struck me later on is I realized that so many people, so unprofessional, while they were enjoying, given my criticism of them, they were enjoying watching Jim Graham get that awful mean Gerald Dixon. Not one of them was professional enough to go over or at least call out, hey Jim, come on, Jim, don't do that. Because it was a complete breach of protocol, of professionalism, from a civic leader, not a civic leader, but an elected leader, with a citizen, in public, at a council meeting. It had ended, yes, but it was in the council chambers. And not one of them had enough sense to call out and stop him. Try to say, hey, Jim, come on. Because maybe Gerald Dixon is the mean guy and he's awful and criticizes them, but that doesn't mean they're like that, you see? And it just was a complete breach of protocol, and none of them stopped him or tried to. And reason with him. Anyway, so Jim Graham walks away from it, and he's getting his stuff to leave, and I finish getting my things together, and he starts leaving, and when he does so, he says, and conflicts of interest are just your opinion. And I'm moving out towards the door, he's leaving, And I said, well, Jim, if conflicts of interest are just opinion, then what about all those professors across America that have written thousands of papers on conflicts of interest? Is it just their opinion? And that was pretty much my tone during that moment and during when Jim was talking, or not talking, but ranting. Because the thing is when Jim was getting loud, I could tell he was excitable and upset. So I didn't want to match that and argue with him. So I kept my voice very modulated and said simply, Jim, you're an elected official. You're the president of council, and you're over here standing above me, berating me like this in a council meeting. So that was it. So anyway, so just as I finished saying about the professors and conflicts of interest, I get to the doorway, and all of a sudden, from behind me, I hear someone say, "Get the fuck out of here!" And I turn and look in the room, and sitting in the seats, it's Auditor Dan Miller. Auditor Dan Miller with his leather coat on, sitting next to a citizen. And I was just shocked, and I looked at him and I said, "Excuse me?" And all of a sudden, from inside the room, I hear one of the women still left, and the mayor had already walked out. Jim Graham had already walked out. So it had to have been Karen Conason, Lori Elmore, or Joanna Heck, or it could have been the clerk of council too. But they said, "Dan, don't." And as they said that, I turned my head towards them, and Dan Miller jumped up out of his seat and came rushing towards me. And from 2 to 4 inches from my face, he said, "Get the fuck out of here!" Just like that. Now, I lived in New York 11 years. It doesn't take a whole lot to startle me or scare me or anything else. So, while it was shocking and it was a very threatening tone that he, invading my personal space, I looked over him and I said, "Excuse me." I said, "This is a public place, Dan. You have no right to tell me anywhere to go." I held my ground. But nevertheless, this is an elected official coming at me, invading my personal space, saying such a thing in such a threatening manner. "Get the fuck out of here!" Just like that. Anyway, so I walk down the stairs. I leave. And at the bottom of the stairs, I think, you know what? I want to call the police. I want to get a record of this. And so I dial up the police, and while I'm talking to the dispatcher, from behind me, Dan Miller's voice says something like, "Excuse me," or "behind you," or whatever it was. And I move away to let him pass. I was facing the parking lot, and as he passes, he mutters under his breath, he says, "Get out of my way, motherfucker." And so before, when he just told me to get the fuck out, that was one thing. But now, he's calling me a motherfucker. Dan Miller, city auditor Dan Miller, is calling me a motherfucker. That's fine, But the thing is it rose the Whitehall in me. The old Whitehall. And I wasn't going to take that kind of crap. Someone call me that. So I looked back, and I told the dispatcher, I said, "Oh, that's nice. The city auditor just called me a motherfucker." And I looked over towards Dan Miller. I said, "Fuck you." I'm sorry, but he got the Whitehall up in me. Anyway, so at that, as he's walking away, he flips me off. And I'm like, oh my God. What is happening here? So he leaves. Several officials gather over by the wheelchair access ramp. It's Bob Bailey, it's Larry Morrison, Wes Cantor, Chris Rodriguez, Council President Jim Graham. I see Zach Woodruff over there. And a few minutes later, squad cars come up. I give a report. I give my recounting of the events. And all of a sudden, while I'm giving my recounting, Dan Miller shows back up. How did that happen? Why did he leave? Why is he showing back up? And he gets out of the car, and the police officer tells him to wait over there, that they'll get to him in a moment. And so he joins the group over there. So I finish up. She goes over and talks to them and so forth. And at that point I thought, and looking at them all, they looked like they were, they looked like people, a family consoling a mother that had just lost her child in a car accident or something. And I thought, these are elected officials. Where is their professionalism? This isn't an issue with their friend Dan. This is an issue with City Auditor Dan Miller. And they can't separate the two. Dan, their friend, is the city auditor and vice versa. And I thought it was very unprofessional. All the women left. Karen Coniston was in her car for a few minutes, and the police officer spoke to her. And but the rest left. They all left. All the men stayed. And they commiserated with each other over there, talking. And at one point it was a quorum. Of course, they'll all say that that wasn't the case, and of course I didn't take a photo, so whatever. But the fact is the rest of them, like the women, should have left. It's not their concern. They weren't involved. The fact is they all should have left, because this wasn't a situation that involved Dan Miller, their friend. It was a situation between the city auditor and a citizen, Gerald Dixon. They just have a real professional problem, and that's one of the biggest problems. Because when it comes down, and it's a very professional problem. When it comes down to doing their, making sure their obligations are taken care of as the council person, as the auditor, etc., towards the citizens, well, it's hard to do that when you know that citizen has criticized your good friend, your drinking buddy, whatever it is, Bob or Chris or Wes or whoever it is. And that's wrong to the citizens. Wrong. It was a shocking moment. It's very telling, too. But thank you for listening.